Ah yes, finally getting back into things with the original of this Horrors from Outer Space series, Dead Space. I'm usually not one for blanket statements, yet you can tell quite a lot about a series' quality from its first game, and it is that magical time where you get to see a concept in its most pure state, when corporate scumbaggery is at its lowest point. I think back to games like Mario Party and God of War, where you get to see the game's first impression to the stage. Dead Space had a prologue, and while that game really does spoil the plot of the original by introducing the backstory of the Marker, the Necromorphs along with the Unitologists, Dead Space still feels like our first steps into the Ishimura since the Kellyan wasn't able to receive Lady Pan's distress signal from Extraction. Also, it seems that the canon kind of forgot that the Ishimura was totally overrun with the Necromorphs by the time they got there, since Chapter 1 starts out with Isaac and company arriving into the departure lounge, and aside from looking a bit disorganized, it doesn't look like anything actually happened, which might have been the case going in, considering the only reason the Kellyan arrived was to follow up on a lack of communication with the Ishimura, the government's most important mining vessel. And ironically, the first one they ever built. The one thing that you'll notice in this game is that it does not go for subtlety. Considering the game waited all of 15 minutes before introducing the Necromorph occupation, so yeah, the entire crew is dead and now the 3 crewmates of the Kellyan need to fix some problems in order to get off the Ishimura, or something. One of the major issues for the entire game is that it doesn't seem EA Redwood had a good enough grasp on how to tell a survival horror story. Yes, what they are doing is important to the structure in that games in the genre are usually focused around a survival journey threaded through one overarching goal, but the difference between this game and, for instance, Silent Hill is that Silent Hill threads the journey through massively different environments and objectives to keep things interesting. EA Redwood gets the objectives down, but since the entire game takes place on the Ishimura, there is no difference between any of the chapters in terms of what Isaac is supposed to be doing. I know that you want to make perfectly clear that Isaac is an engineer and it's his job, but you need to have him doing something interesting. Going to a place and monkeying around with objective item 3B isn't enthralling to anybody. No one cares if he can fix an engine or fire off some guns. Okay, we need him to actually be doing something important. It just seems that EA Redwood pinned a lot of gameplay to its combat, since it's more of a third-person shooter than a horror game, and it does do that well. Necromorphs are incredibly dangerous, and you'll be dealing mostly with mobs of them throughout the corridors, and the back-to-the-wall style when any of the enemies can rush you is intimidating. While Dead Space is a stranger to subtlety, the screaming danger is still immersive as shit, because Dead Space is constantly playing skittering, banging, or other sound effects that always has the player looking over Isaac's shoulder, since there's a ton of times throughout the engineering, Isaac will just be assailed by Necromorphs popping out of nowhere. And when that happens, Isaac needs to pool whatever ammo he has to dismember the Necromorphs to slow them down. The combat is exactly the same as in Extraction, except for the difference in perspective, obviously, and requiring moving around the enemies, which is almost impossible to do without getting hurt, since Dead Space has no ability to dodge. You'll need to manage your health, your ammunition, and the enemies all at the same time. Choosing which enemy you throw stasis at will be the difference between losing 2 chunks of your health or not. It is an effective and appropriately sticky combat system, and it runs into a kind of problem where the player is required to do all of the combat even when resource management is a part of the game. There is no ability to run away from any of these fights. You have to do all of them. And when you have to choose the difference between keeping 5 bullets or not, there's not really any space for that to really work. Also, since the game gives Isaac no useful melee attacks, keeping a balance of ammunition is critical, and the normal game gives you enough to make encounters possible between enemy drops, the shops, and item crates, but it can be irritating as all hell when you have no ability to run away from any of the combat due to lack of everything. And speaking of lacking, there's also Isaac himself. Now, back in Extraction, when the Four Musketeers were dealing with the outbreak in the colony, they had frequent moments to establish their character, show that they're fearful and they're confused about what the Necromorphs were, and how they were going to survive the infection. It's a critical part of the story to have characters reacting to what's going on, even if the characters are reacting in a non-human manner. And this was a disastrously wrong move on EA Redwood's part, in making Isaac Clarke a silent protagonist, almost to Gordon Freeman levels. Sure, for most of the game there's no reason for Isaac specifically to talk, since throughout the game he's basically being handed a bunch of problems and the supporting cast can react for him. But then there's points later on in the game where he's being victimized by his own delusions and he says absolutely nothing. I mean, even a mute has the ability to make body motions as a method of communication. Isaac just stands there, doing literally nothing when shit is hitting the fan and his psyche right in front of him. And the shit is most obvious in the form of some unnamed doctor who managed to survive the Ishimura disaster. And we're introduced to the unitologist subplot after the game's been building up to the point that the Ishimura crew kind of knew that was coming to them. The impacts of these developments are totally shot in the foot, because this series decided to release that prequel game Extraction. I'm assuming that this game is sort of like the Aliens franchise in terms of its traditional plot, where in every iteration the plot rebuilds up the threat of the xenomorph by shrouding it in mystery until they decide to show up. I'm not a movie person, so I'm not sure if that's true, but this is basically what happened in Dead Space. After finishing Extraction, a player already knows what all the twists in Dead Space are because they've already happened in the canon. We've already seen the colony fall to chaos, and we know that the unitologist and the marker are related. We know what the marker is, so there's no suspense other than the consistent necromorph attacks. For a newcomer, it would still work and be an enjoyable introduction to how the marker is going to obliterate humankind later on in the series, but again, they would be let down simply by how slowly the game is moving. For the first handful of chapters, all Isaac is really doing is fixing random problems on the ship. He's monkeying with some engines, or a part, or he's in the cargo hold just blowing things up. And maybe occasionally he sees something fucked up. He sees a vision, a delusion, someone who's not there. He will see the elite necromorphs, the unitologists, and the captain's hijacking of the Ishimura to serve his own needs. That isn't brought up until the halfway point. And that's been dominated by walking and shooting through the same environment for 5 hours. What this game really needed was some stakes, an overarching goal to follow. In Silent Hill, the plot was less likely to stall because Harry needed to navigate Silent Hill and all of its wrongness to find Cheryl. And Dead Space could have had that with Isaac's wife being found later on the ship, you know, if that was built up a bit more expertly and was integrated into the story. However, the massive issue is that the game has firmly established that everyone died right at the start of the game. It's almost impossible to think otherwise, even when she's standing right in front of him. It's like trying to be inspired by the hope for the future being told by a ghost. It is something really strange that this did not occur to EA Redwood when they were writing the story, since they tried to use that as a Silent Hill 2 style twist right at the end of the game. When I was playing this bit, I had no clue why our female ally brought it up, because I thought the game made it blatantly obvious by the 3-hour mark that she was fucking dead. Did the game seriously want its audience to believe that anyone could survive the Ishimura infection? Because they definitely didn't. Even in Extraction, literally all the characters died. Up until this point in the series, the only character who lived is Isaac Clarke. Spoiler alert. The unitologists are all dead because their stupid religion made them believe the best option was suicide so that they could ascend from their deaths to a higher evolutionary state, which they did by becoming space zombies. The necromorph encouragement killed the rest of the crew who wasn't involved with their stupid ideas, and even the rescue ship that Isaac and friends sent for until they radioed in that they decided to pick up an escape pod from the Ishimura containing a trapped necromorph, because that was fucking smart. The rescue ship later crashes into the Ishimura, which allows them a chance at escaping themselves. Because, you know, Deus Ex Machina and all that. Although, one person survived out of the main cast. Dr. Kyne, another affected crew member of either the Valor or the Ishimura who has pieced together the plot of Dead Space and therefore has a plan. His plan is to take the marker back to Earth, I think. Yeah, because the plot of the game is its weakest part, I can barely remember anything he said. The important part is that the marker that was dug up on Aegis 7 and created the necromorph infection is on the Ishimura and is now on a cargo freighter before they escape. This is beginning to get to the end game, so spoilers ahead for this flimsy plot of the game. After the marker is loaded, it's revealed that the female ally character betrays Isaac Clarke and takes the marker by killing Dr. Kyne after an hour of screen time. And here's the biggest mindfuck of the game. Apparently, the marker is actually man-made by the government, who she works for. It was reverse engineered from another marker that they found, and the unitologists decided to praise it as a sacred artifact. The government used them as useful morons in order to further an experiment to unleash the marker's effects on Aegis 7 and the Ishimura. Yep, it's a new spin on that classic trope of the horror genre, government experimentation. However, after some crazy shenanigans involving Isaac's continuing delusion of his wife being able to recall the freighter that the female ally stole back to the cargo hold because the practical applications of such a mechanism are infinite, and then Isaac and his delusionary wife manage to co-pilot the freighter down to Aegis 7 so that they can put the marker back. So, Lady Pants appears out of nowhere and steals the marker straight back to the freighter after some more shenanigans that leaves the female ally as dead as the villain from Borderlands. Isaac Clarke escapes Aegis 7 with the marker, and since the game ends on Isaac being attacked by his delusion, he somehow forgets to jettison the marker into a sun to destroy the necromorph threat once and for all, leaving him as the only victim. Because this is all completely brilliant. I cannot believe this is how the game ended. This is all ridiculous. But I do want to set the record straight on this one, because this review seems a bit salty. I don't hate Dead Space. Far from it. I think it's a great game and a beginning for its series. It sets up the central threat and the characters and the situation, and that can all be fleshed out later. The gameplay is really what we're here for, since the plot is bare bones and mostly told through audio logs, and the third-person dismemberment mob-based combat was something unique and utterly terrifying, transforming this from a story-based game to one about just keeping Isaac alive in the face of a government experiment gone completely sideways, leaving Isaac as the only survivor of Aegis 7 before it was imploded by a crashing moon that just happened to be flying by. It has great atmosphere that always keeps you on your toes between all the sound effects and necromorph stealth going on. It lacks good environments since the entire game is basically walking through great corridors, and it sorely needed a kick in the pants to speed it up. It's not that subtle horror that will permeate a location and make everything suspect and fall into a corrupt state, yet it's still effective since the game is constantly keeping Isaac and the player on their toes, although the decision to make him a silent protagonist was a greatly misguided one. Basically, it's a mixed bag. It's got some good things and it's got some bad things. EA's decision to transform EA Redwood into Visceral Games probably had something to do with this game's great reception, and in this time 8 years later, the game still holds up. It may not be as solid as the first Halo or God of War, but the gameplay of keeping Isaac alive is involving and definitely has a place for a strong fanbase. It just wasn't a good idea to put out that prologue that spoiled everything that happens in this game. Well, now that we've finished our time with the original, you might think that the sequel would be immediately next. Yet, we have one thing more to do in between. Some digital-only title called Dead Space Ignition. I'm not sure what it is beyond that, so I'm definitely excited. I'll see you guys next time for some more marker hijinks after this final scoreboard. and a stealthy victory for gamers. See you guys next time!